today in the Washington Post there was a major article about sea level rise and climate change, and I would like any of the panelists to address that issue and how it's affecting the health of the bay. Apparently, according to the Post article, the sea level rise is rising twice as fast in the Chesapeake as in other parts of the world. I thought that was astounding. So if you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, sea level rise affected by climate change is really causing a loss of a lot of the coastal wetlands that we have around the bay. And when we lose those coastal wetlands, we're losing some of the filtering capacity for nutrients and sediment to enter the bay, as well as important habitat for migratory birds. Some of the high sea level rise in the Chesapeake Bay is due not only to the actual rise of the ocean levels, but a slight amount of subsidence that is occurring in the Chesapeake Bay area.
At least in the Chesapeake, another piece of climate change is the increase in temperature. We've seen a 1 to 2 degree temperature rise over the last 30 years. We saw the direct effect of that temperature increase. Hotter summers, more on record than we've seen in the past, have a direct impact on our underwater grasses. As we saw in the lower Chesapeake Bay, we lost a lot of eelgrass, which is critical to our crabs because of those high temperatures. Those grasses are sort of on their southern range of where they can in fact live. You don't have eelgrass, our crabs are going to be in trouble. So there's a direct temperature connection to one of our more important resources, underwater grasses, connected to what goes on our dinner plate, that being crabs.
I'm Peyton Robertson, the director of the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office. I think the article does a good job of talking about, you know, many of the implications of that rise in sea level. I think another important aspect of it is what are the implications for restoration with respect to that rise in water level. What do we do if we're trying to restore the bay and its habitats? And we've done some work on this, and we do, first of all, need to know exactly what's happening with respect to that loss of shoreline before we go in and do restoration projects. We want to make sure that any wetlands or areas that we restore are not going to be inundated in the future, and we'll lose that habitat again. But I think the article also points up that looking at softening those shorelines, if you will, or using living shorelines whereby we plant grasses and slightly change some of the physical features of the environment such that energy is reduced from waves and erosion, that's a better solution over the long haul and more cost effective than hardened structures that have been traditionally used, things like bulkheads and riprap. Those things, they're effective for quite some time, but as water levels rise, they're not going to be effective. They'll be overwhelmed.
Roseanne, thank you for your question. My name is Jeff Lape, Director of the Chesapeake Bay Program. The one thing I'd add is it's important to realize that many of the efforts that we're taking today to restore and protect the Chesapeake Bay will help mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. So it's very important that as we move forward and we reduce nutrients, and as George said, one of the items that every one of us can take is reducing our miles in cars, reducing the amount of energy we use. That will help stem the effects, some of the effects of climate change.
I think it was Rich Batuk who was talking about oysters, and I'm wondering if anybody can comment, or any of you can comment on the move to introduce Asian oysters into the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah. Again, Peyton Robertson for NOAA. There's, I think, as you know, a process underway to develop this programmatic environmental impact statement, which lays out several alternatives. The alternatives include a native-only, if you will, alternative whereby we would not just continue to do status quo with native restoration, but basically improve and enhance the focus on how to bring back the native species. A second alternative proposes to use essentially a sterile form of the Asian oyster, a so-called triploid form of the species Ariakensis, and a third alternative that would basically introduce that species without any modification, a reproductively viable Asian oyster. That decision is pending. The Army Corps of Engineers in Norfolk has the lead for that environmental impact statement. I can speak for NOAA and the fact that we've gone on record and filed a letter with the Army Corps of Engineers indicating our preference for alternative 8A, as it's called, which is the native oyster restoration alternative.
So there's no decision yet?
There's not a decision yet.
Is there a timetable?
To my knowledge, I do know there's a meeting of the executive committee of the lead agencies. That's the states of Maryland and Virginia and the Norfolk District of the Army Corps of Engineers tomorrow. NOAA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and EPA are all cooperating agencies on that EIS.